Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 13 of the Midweek Rewind. I'm Matt, and this is Brent. That's not Brent. This is Kyle. Thanks for tuning in today. Happy December to those of you who are watching, and we're excited to be back. We took a break last week for Thanksgiving. Brent is gone again today. I think he's in Denver for some kind of big important person meeting. So you are joined by what I affectionately refer to as the B team. Whenever Brent's gone, it seems like you preach usually, and I'm either leading worship or giving announcements. So we're the safe second choice when Brent is gone. So
I'm like that you say second. I'm happy to be second. It could be third.
It's true. Yeah, I'm happy with second too.
I've been here for 5 years, and I think 4 out of the 5 years I preached Thanksgiving holiday weekend. So.
There you go. That's what you're here for, Kyle.
That's fine.
All right. Well, thanks again for those of you watching. As always, we'll be taking your questions if you have anything you want to ask Kyle about. But we've got a couple of things prepared as well. So, Kyle, let's just dive in real quick here. You spoke on Sunday. Why don't you give a quick recap of what you talked about on Sunday?
So this has been something that I've been wrestling with for a while now. I deal with students, so constantly junior high, senior high students, usually at the beginning of their faith journey. So they first discovered Jesus, they first got a relationship with Jesus, trust, all that. And I don't deal a lot with people who are older. So my question that I've been wrestling with is, what factors happen at the beginning of the relationship with Jesus that continues on the rest of their life to where they can finish well? As in, at the end of their life, wherever that may be, they have loved the Lord our God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, all that till the end. So that's been a journey for me, probably for about 2 years now. And so this message just came out of the current research I have, and I'm right in the middle of it. I probably read 10, 15 books on generations, on faith development, on discipleship. And it's discouraging how few people finish well with the Christian faith.
Yeah. And kind of, you had one story about that I wanted to get to. And I know I kind of have an example of this in my life too, but you shared an example of your mentor growing up, or mentor ministry, how he had this certain list that he prayed for, and you've kind of made a similar list. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So he was in his 70s when I was discipled by him, and he's in his upper 90s now. And he just would meet with young men and go through the basics. Sometimes he would go through a book of the Bible. Sometimes we would sit there and just talk about life. And it's a skill set that not everyone has, that can answer any question that a person has. And he tends to kind of nominate people, or I nominate someone, and then he goes to disciple them. And he just basically started praying for people. And he has all different types of lists. And one list he had was when he was in Bible college and everything else, all the people who wanted to be in ministry, he started praying for them. And then he just kept track not to follow up with them, but just kind of see where they are in life. And very few, I think it was 4 out of 40, ended up finishing well at the end of his life after about 30 to 40 years.
Yeah.
So I did a similar list actually with my college degree 15 years ago, who graduated from youth ministry, and very few are left in the ministry in any capacity. But I didn't do a faith follow-up and where they are spiritually and like that. So that showed me, well, it's pretty big.
Yeah, it is big, because I know, like, for me personally, I have a lot of Christian school friends in high school. A lot of them aren't necessarily super involved with church or Christianity anymore. Went to a Christian college, and a lot of the people I went to school with, kind of a similar story. So, and this backs up your research, right? That especially in the young adult years, that drift is pretty common. Is that true with your research?
Yeah. So I'm a stats guy. I'm a history buff. I like facts and data, and then kind of conclude our results from that facts and data. And statistics show that most people, I think it's 85%, accept Christ between the age of 4 and 18. But 50%, and now they're saying close to 60 to 70% of this next generation, Generation Z, are going to be leaving their faith when they graduate high school. As in, not necessarily they lose their salvation, but more there's no active involvement with the church or their spiritual life in any real way. And so the trends are not decreasing, but actually increasing. And so why is that? And that's kind of my driving force. Why is that? And there's tons of reasons, but that's kind of the reason behind it, is the majority are leaving once they graduate high school.
Yep. So I know you quote stats like no one else I know.
It helps me.
Are you like 99% sure all those are accurate? Because like I can't remember like 4 different numbers, and you just spat out stats like it's just in your brain, and that always amazes me.
Stats are easy for me to remember. Now, I have a hard time with people's names. I can remember faces, but not people's names.
I called you Brent to start this, so
yeah. And it didn't bother me. That's been happened before too. We look so much similar.
Right.
That's much like. But I would say the majority of my stats are correct. However,
I'm just giving you a hard time.
You're going to have to prove me on it. And the other thing is stats change.
Yeah, true.
Over the years. And so I see more trends than anything else, but that's just always been easy for me to remember.
Yeah.
In that.
Oh, it's great. It just blows my mind because I'm not a math person.
Well, I can't add the stats. I can just quote them.
Okay, there you go. So a couple of things that stuck out to me on Sunday is you told 2 stories. I'm wondering if you can just kind of quickly give a recap. The one about Billy Graham and Chuck Templeton, which I did not know that name. I probably should have, but I didn't.
Most people are not going to know it.
And then the Da Vinci story. So why don't you walk us through those real quick as kind of examples of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So in my research, there's this movement of God, or revivals happen. Some people say every 500 years, some people say every 100 years, depending on the researcher. But in the 40s and 50s, this huge church evangelistic revival happened, particularly in the United States. And the pastor's role changed from being a pastor shepherd to being more of an evangelist. Another trend happened actually in the 90s, where the pastor didn't become just an evangelist and a shepherd, but also now a leader, and he needed to be a leader. And so we're seeing that trend nowadays, that the pastor needs to be a strong leader, vision, and all that. That's a whole nother side note. Yes. All you need to know is there were several prominent pastors who rose in popularity due to their public speaking ability, and Chuck Templeton, Billy Graham, and a couple others were pretty powerful and influential. A lot of people came to Christ. This organization called Youth for Christ started at that time. Billy Graham actually didn't start Youth for Christ, but he was the first full-time employee on that. And Chuck Templeton was his good friend, and he was also employee for Youth for Christ. And so they would just go around and fill gyms, and then eventually stadiums and all that. But Chuck Templeton lasted 9 years in this. And then he had a hard time dealing with World War II and why would God allow such evil. He had a hard time wrestling with his view of the world and his view of Scripture and view of Jesus. And so he basically wrongly concluded, well, my view of Jesus is wrong, not my view of the world. And he left. And he spoke very positive about Billy Graham the rest of his life. He said, if I was going to believe it, it was because Billy genuinely believes what he preaches. And so he never bashed Billy Graham or anything like that. But he's just one of many people that we know have left the faith.
Yep.
And it's sad. And it was one of the first popular things because we have historical records, we have radio interviews, we have writings on that. So
which leads to Da Vinci, another
Da Vinci. Yeah. So here's my thing. I look at how Jesus taught his people in the New Testament, and it was always story based. It was parables. It just connected with people. So I know that stories tend to gravitate, and you latch on and remember the stories more than even my points. Totally get that if that's you.
Well, when I was preparing today, the first things I remembered was all the stories you shared. Like that's just how our brains work.
Yeah,
so,
that's how our brains work. So stories are a crucial part of the preaching process for me. And so I had this story for a while now, and it's basically a legend on the story of the Last Supper and the person who Da Vinci painted and was Jesus at first. Many years later, came back, and the same person was Judas.
Like modeling for them.
Yeah, modeling for them. And Da Vinci didn't know this and all that. I've had this for a while now, just kind of saved it, and the topic fit the story. And it was just so good to pass up. It hit me even when I first saw that. I was like, oh, this is so good. Just because that could be any one of us.
Right.
We start out super strong. Life happens. We make poor choices, whatever. And then we end up modeling for the Judas character
Yeah.
on that. So that's kind of the quick synopsis.
Gotcha. So let's kind of transition a little bit, and why. I mean, I think we all of us know this, but I want to hear your perspective on why is it so hard to finish well? Like, why is it continually true that people drift? That, you know, the Judas example that you gave, or the Templeton, like what is so strong that pulls us, that makes it finishing well so rare and so difficult for us to do?
So this will stay just between you and I, right?
Yes.
Okay. So the reasons behind that can be very painful to hear, because we know someone who's probably have drifted away, or currently drifting, or have drifted, or we are dealing it with ourselves. And so sometimes when I list reasons, there's pushback. Well, that's not true. Or, oh, I should have done that better, particularly when I deal with parents. So I deal with parents a lot. And I see heartbroken parents all the time where their student doesn't have interest in the church in general after high school, and they blame themselves and everything else. So what I'm going to share with you is just quick synopsis and points on here's some reasons. And one of them is they don't take ownership of their faith when they're in high school or junior high. We are developing a culture where our parents they're called lawnmower parents, where basically mow or snow blow parents or snow plow parents. They basically push everything in front of the students clear so that they can walk and have a clear path. That's a problem when it comes to faith, because faith is actually stretched and strengthened when it's tested, like a muscle. And if we don't put students in situations where they have to wrestle with things, they have to deal with doubt, they have to deal with how this part of the world, or what I'm seeing in this world, is not matching up to what I learned, what needs to happen, and do they make those adjustments and look for scripture and go to other mature Christians for guidance, or do they just give up or fight or whatever? So some of it is just they don't have room to doubt, they don't have room to wrestle or strengthen their faith. The other thing is they don't have a chance to experience their faith outside of church. So there's no mission trip opportunities, there's no Bible study, there's no direct personal devotions other than family devotions or family prayer time before lunch. There's times where very limited view of scripture, as in they're not very knowledgeable of the Bible and God's word, so they can't even use that as a tool when something doesn't come up. There's poor decisions that people make, and sometimes it has nothing to do with how they're raised. It just they made a poor decision. And instead of going to God in that poor decision and looking for healing and forgiveness, they lie about it, or they try to deal with it some other way. And so then it's a snowball effect, which is a big factor, and they move away. Another one is fear. People literally trap themselves in their own prison of fear, and they don't know what to do. And so even though there's nothing in front of them, they can't move forward. And so they just strengthen the bars of their internal prison of fear harder and faster because of doubt, or because they're afraid of being afraid. And I've seen so many students in college just so afraid of making the wrong decision that they don't make any decisions. And they don't deal with that. The other thing is they're not exposed to other viewpoints, and it's a floodgate right out of high school on that. Now that is actually decreasing due to social media. So social media has brought in a lot of weird beliefs into students' mindsets. And then sometimes it's just apathy. They don't care, or the church doesn't care if they're part of them. They don't get plugged into a life group. They don't get plugged into Sunday school. They don't get plugged into something in the church offers, and they get really busy with college or with work, and Sunday's their only day off, or man, it's really early in the morning. And eventually they just slowly drift off. Then they use the excuse, oh, I'll watch it online later. And the first week they usually do, but second week and all that. So I bet there's hundreds of reasons why people don't finish well, and very few of why they do. Yeah. That's a long,
after that
long expression.
Massive downer.
Sorry.
No. It's true. We have to talk about it. That's good. So let's shift gears. And you kind of ended your talk on Sunday with some advice, because when people start a relationship with God, they don't want to drift. They want to finish well. They don't
yeah.
want to be one of the stats that ends up on the wrong path. So if someone's recently become a Christian, or for those of us who have been for a while, why don't you share your advice that you had as how we can avoid some of those traps that you talked about?
Yeah. So some of it could be boiled down to two big things that I talked about on Sunday, only because there was only enough time to talk about two things. So one of it is having the right perspective. So if you're going to run a race, particularly a short track race or whatnot, if you have no idea where the finish line is or which direction you should run to, you're going to slow down, you're going to get lost and all that. So a lot of times we don't have the eternal perspective. So we're on this earth basically this long. This is kind of, Francis Chan kind of shared this before. We're on this earth about this length of time, but eternity, our souls go on forever. And we get so focused on what happens here, we don't focus on what the decisions we make here and the priorities and the relationships we develop here last for eternity. So some of it is just where we have the wrong perspective. And I showed a funny little psychology video with that.
Why don't you explain that? Because we have to tell people a funny story. Kyle showed this video without
30 seconds.
Without telling me or anyone else.
Right.
And we showed this video. It goes on our recording. It's on the live stream and everything. And then a couple hours later, I get this little email from Google that says, "Hey, you've been flagged for copyright infringement."
Yep.
So if you try to watch Kyle's sermon on YouTube right now, part of it is missing because Kyle went all rogue and illegal on us. Yeah. So if people didn't see the video, what's the video and why did you talk about it?
The gorilla illustration or monkey illustration. So long story short, it is developed by a psychologist professor, and his name is actually Daniel Simons. And basically, he did this to see how do we pay attention to everything going around us, or are we so focused on one thing that we don't pay attention to what's going on around us, and where's that fall? So the task is count the number of passes a team in white makes while there's a team in black who's doing the same thing, and a gorilla walks through. It's a 30-second video, and the statistics show that half of the population do not see the gorilla walk through and wave to the camera and nothing.
So I had seen it before, but I remember the first time I saw that and I did not see it. And I thought, like you said, we're going to play the exact same video, and I can vouch it was the same button.
People did not believe me. It is the exact same video.
The first time I saw it, I did not. I was so busy counting the passes, I did not see the gorilla. So It's crazy.
And then there's the color of the curtain changing and a player on the black team leaving the game, all that. Here's what they've noticed. More competitive people don't notice the gorilla. In that.
So you didn't even see anything happening during the video.
Yeah.
That's what you're
My first time, I was like, I got 16 passes. I got it right. Yeah. And then what they're also noticing is people who are more outside the box thinkers. They sometimes keep track, but usually they don't get the passes right, but they notice everything. So less than 5% notice the color of the change of curtain or the player leaving the game.
There you are with your stats again. I don't believe you.
I bet it's 7%. The book said.
Okay.
It could be like 5.34. Yeah. And then he talks about the difference between looking and seeing. And I didn't get into this on Sunday. Looking is you can look at something but not truly see it. Seeing means you're eliminating distractions and you're focused on it. Your attention is on this thing because you truly see. And a lot of times when it comes to Jesus, we just look at Jesus. We just look, oh, yep, I'm supposed to go to church. I'm there. But we don't take the time to seeing our relationship with Jesus and where it is and have an honest discussion. You know what? It could be a little bit better. It could be this area of my life needs to be maybe improved. And I'm not trying to be a downer that, we're always going to be needing growth, although we do. It's more, if you look at your marriage, you constantly want to have a better marriage, an improved marriage. Do you see your spouse in a new light? Do you see good, the bad, and how you can help them more and more, communicate more and more? And that's the difference between looking and seeing. And that video shows an example of you need to look versus see, or see versus look. So That's a quick little synopsis of that.
So all that was to say, that was one of your closing points was keep the right perspective.
And the second one is run with endurance. And that goes back to, what we talked about earlier is endurance means pushing through no matter what, as in there's no reason to stop, slow down, you go for it and you keep going. And Hebrews 12 talks about running with endurance, this journey, and it uses the illustration of the spiritual life as a race. Multiple times Paul uses that as a description. So I don't know if Paul was an athlete or not, but that's they have that. And so a lot of times we don't have strong enough faith muscles, if you will, if I could use that illustration, to get through the difficult times in life, because storms happen and we need to have the right perspective to push, and then the decision or ability to push through the storms. Those two kind of go hand in hand. And it's hard because the only way you can grow your faith muscles is through putting yourself in faith stretching opportunities, missions trips, signing up or serving in a church in areas that are outside your comfort zone. Like if you're not an outgoing person and you sign up to be a greeter on Sunday mornings, that's going to stretch your faith. It doesn't mean you're going to like it. You don't always have to like it, but those kind of things really build up endurance for that.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to hit on is there's a phrase we started to say around staff a little bit more often lately. I think Brent said it a couple of times from the stage, but it's remember the why. And that's, I know you and I were at the Leadership Summit where Simon Sinek talked about that. He's kind of the guy who kind of started that whole idea. And basically the gist of it is don't get so caught up in doing things just to do them that you forget why you're doing them. And I think that's easy for us who are, especially if we're super involved in the church or on staff of the church, we just get so, we got to do this next thing that we forget why we're doing it. And that kind of goes back to some of the things you've been talking about. And I wanted to ask you too, I mean, we just announced a couple weeks ago the building and the name change. Those have gone through now. They've passed. And now I know this is maybe one of your initial reasons why you wanted to talk about this is now that now that that's happened, we need to finish this strong, because I think a lot of us were excited about all these changes and they're big things. We're kind of ready to go, but we need to finish it out now because the building is going to be several years of at least fundraising. So was that kind of part of your thought process, and how can we take this into maybe that part of our life as the church is this new day that we're entering?
Yeah. So it's going to change our church. The trajectory of our church has now drastically changed. Some people think for the good, some people are bad. We will see. But what I do know is that this is just the start. So the vote was not the end. Like once we vote, then that's it. No, we're just starting. And this has been my prayer since we started this whole name change and building process is, are we going to finish well in this process? Because now this is just the start of these changes. And it doesn't mean, okay, the paid staff, all right, this is what you get paid for, go ahead and do it. No, this requires everyone on board, praying, sacrificing, surrendering, celebrating in times. There's going to be little victories along the way. We need to take time to celebrate. People get on board through prayer, finances, serving, all that. This is going to hopefully galvanize and unify our church to move forward. How we move forward is the next kind of step in having those discussions. It's not where Brent's just going to say, okay, here's the 5 things we want you to do. This is going to be a very collaborative effort, which means it's going to be a little bit more messy and it's going to be a little bit slower, but it's going to get more people on board. And that's why I love how, looking back on what Jesus handled with the disciples, there's times where Jesus spoon-fed them. Okay, here's what this parable meant. And he kind of goes through that. And other times he just says, well, you feed them. Didn't give directions, didn't give anything. Just, okay, you feed them. And I bet the disciples were like,
yeah.
And that's kind of where we're going to move forward in this. This is the start of something new. But the reason why behind it, I absolutely love, not just because it's a ministry I work with, but working intentionally changing or making changes so more young people can come and find Jesus. Not join our church, although that's a great icing on the cake, if you will.
Yeah.
But find Jesus, and let's eliminate as many hurdles as we possibly can so people see Jesus the moment they enter this building, or the moment they hear someone who goes to this church about Jesus. And that's a culture change as much as it is a heart change and a physical building change.
Yeah.
That's reason why.
Big exciting thing. I'm excited. I'm really excited about where we're
too.
headed, and I think your sermon fits well into that season that we're in. So
Yeah.
Got a couple things to wrap up with here. Anything else from your sermon you want to hit on before we?
No.
Cool. You did a great job. Very great message. So if you're watching now and you haven't watched or listened, I encourage you to go do that. And now you know what the gorilla is that you missed, that you can't watch on YouTube anymore.
Yeah.
So
you can Google search it.
yes. So I wanted to wrap up. We got a couple more minutes. This is just like we mentioned, a kind of crazy time. I wanted to give you minutes to talk about something that you're doing tonight, and then just run through a couple other things that might be helpful for people to know. So real quick, you're doing this parent workshop series, Kyle. Why don't you tell us what that is and what you're talking about tonight?
Yeah, so the first Thursday of every month, we want to help equip parents or just give them some knowledge, just because teen culture is changing so fast. And so tonight is about mental health and wellness for your kids and students. And so anyone who is a parent or who is interacting with teenagers or kids in any way, they can come at 7:00 tonight. And they'll be able to kind of hear all about that through various social worker and things like that. Her name is Serena, and she's one of our leaders, and she works with teenagers on a huge spectrum of mental health or wellness.
Huge issue. I'm glad you're tapping on that. That's very important.
Yeah.
So cool. Parents, I encourage you to go tonight to that.
Yep.
But if you don't go to that, you can also go to EmLife, which is tonight for young married couples.
Yeah. So this is just started in 2019. Basically 2 new ministries. One's called EmLife, as in married life. This is for young married couples. What we're seeing is that couples are getting married, and that's nothing new. But we would love to see couples connect with other young couples and have a chance for them to interact with each other, build each other up, develop friendships, help do some encouragement, because the divorce rate is pretty high, and it doesn't matter if you're Christian or non-Christian. And if we can help early on in the marriage before it becomes a critical factor, that will hopefully kind of alleviate some of that, the divorce and all that. So EmLife is just, we do a no pressure life group, which literally means no pressure. You don't need to sign up unless you have kids, because it's free childcare. It's free. Every other Thursday. We are considering even making it every Thursday in 2020. And it's just a great ministry called EmLife. And the other thing that we developed is Converge Connect, which is our 20s and 30s ministry. So if you're 20s and 30s, doesn't matter if you're married, single, whatever, we meet on Tuesday nights at Want Coffee. And we just come and talk and have an honest discussion about Jesus and faith and life. And you get some really good coffee. So that's Tuesday nights at 6:30. So those are the 2 ministries we have started to directly tackle this young 20s and 30s generation, millennials, Gen Z, in that. Cool.
All right, we're wrapping up. I've got a couple quick things about Christmas, but hold on with me because I have a question for you and for you. So hold on for just one more minute. But I want to let you know about our Christmas services. So this Sunday, we're kicking off our Christmas sermon series called Lights. Pastor Brent's going to be here. It's going to be a really cool series I'm looking forward to. And this is kind of one of those Sundays that it'll be fun. All 3 services are the same. So we have the choir, orchestra, and band in all 3 services. It's going to be great. Sunday of music, and we also have the little kids singing, but only the first 2 services. So if you want to hear the little kids, come to 8:30, 9:45. It's just going to be great.
That's going to go on everyone's cell phone.
Yes, we'll have a lot of phones recording that. So please join us on Sunday. And then if you haven't heard yet, we also have our Christmas Eve services planned and ready to go. So those are at 3:30, 4:45, and 6. So we encourage you to get those on your calendar and come to whichever one of those works well for your family Christmas schedule on Christmas Eve. So last question. Well, I guess real quick, Brent will be back next week. We'll be back on Midweek Rewind. Brent will be here. But I was curious, Kyle, are you a podcast listener? Do you listen to podcasts?
Yeah, I'm not a religious one, as in I regularly listen to this particular person. I usually, based on the research oh, this is a podcast about leadership. I listen to a few of that. Or this is a podcast about generations. I listen to that.
Cool.
But I like podcasts.
Cool.
I do.
I love podcasts. I listen to a bunch of them all the time. So my question for you is we're trying to consider if we should turn the Midweek Rewind, into an audio podcast. So I'm curious if you like podcasts. Why don't you go ahead and comment here or send me a message or send the church a message. I'm just trying to do a little bit of research. I'm curious. I know a lot of you like to watch live, and sometimes we have some live questions, and that's really fun. But I know a lot of people can't watch live because of work or kids or whatever. So I've had several people tell me they come back and watch later, which is great. But if you want to be able to, put it on your phone in the car or at the gym or whatever, if a podcast of this would be helpful to you, comment or let me know. We're kind of starting to consider that. So love to hear your feedback if that's something you're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. With that, we're at 30 minutes. I think it's time to go.
Okay.
Anything else you want to wrap up with, Kyle?
No, Merry Christmas.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah. Finish well, like Kyle talked about. Hope to see you on Sunday for a great morning of worship and teaching with Pastor Brent with our sermon series. And yeah, Merry Christmas. And hello to Black Widow. No spoilers, but Black Widow finished well.
Oh, yeah. I'm not going to say it.
Oh, that's all I'm going to say. See you later. Have a great Thursday.